What's going on, everybody? It is that time again. The Sooners Illustrated podcast, episode 153, on this Thursday, February 13th, 2025. Josh Callaway, Collin Kennedy with you on a Thursday. Collin was in Atlanta over the weekend. Under Armour Atlanta has a lot of recruiting things to get into from the weekend out there. The next Under Armour event in Dallas is coming up this weekend. Collin will, of course, be there for that as well, right in his backyard. We'll preview that a little bit on the back end as well. A lot of recruiting stuff to get into on the show on a Thursday. But, Collin, do want to start with the current team before we get into some of the recruiting stuff. This kind of came somewhat out of nowhere. It feels like maybe it's a non-story. Maybe it is. We're going to talk about it. We'll pull it apart a little bit. So there was some reports earlier this week that DeMarco Murray, who we've talked about this before, we did this last year, is a guy who comes up for other job openings relatively regularly, that he was a candidate for Penn State, that Penn State's running back job was open. They were interested. They talked to DeMarco. Collin, I'll just phrase it to you this way. What do you make of it? Is it something that OU fans should be concerned about? It sounds like, from my end, probably not anything too concerning. What is your take on this? This was kind of the one thing floating around for OU fans this week as just kind of like is this a thing, sort of a situation? What's your read on the situation, DeMarco Murray's interest in Penn State and Penn State's interest in him?
Yeah, I debated on even trying to tackle this subject because it felt like the story for all of an hour and a half, maybe. And now you head into the weekend and it just feels like a little bit of a blip on the radar as Oklahoma continues to navigate this offseason. And look, in talking to folks, just my read of the situation, like it was something that came up. How much steam was behind it? I personally am not so sure there was as much as maybe it was slightly made out to be.
Yeah.
Obviously, DeMarco Murray has pretty much made it clear behind the scenes that he's not necessarily looking to get out right now. But it is one of those things where I think people should start kind of taking these storylines with a grain of salt, because last offseason, you heard DeMarco Murray's name come up with not just Ohio State, but Michigan and Mississippi State. And then into this offseason, we were reporting that not necessarily on the Oklahoma side or the DeMarco Murray side, but that I had been hearing that over in the Dallas Cowboys organization, that DeMarco was a name that was coming up within that franchise's walls. And then this comes up, and the way it was kind of phrased to me talking to some folks is that Penn State talked to DeMarco Murray about the position, but that Penn State had him on its board, so to speak, of running back assistants that the program had interest in. When someone gets notice of those conversations, it's obviously going to peak the eyebrows up a little bit. But I think just kind of, and by no means am I acting like I'm a Penn State beat reporter, but just talking to folks out there, talking to some of our reporters at Lions 24/7, and they do an excellent job.
Yeah.
It kind of sounds like Penn State was looking for an accomplished running backs coach, but they're also looking for someone with not just recruiting chops, but recruiting chops in the Northeast, things of that nature. And because of that, I think DeMarco Murray was one of, I received a list of like a few candidates that were on Penn State's monitor list. So in general, I don't think there's much here anymore. Now, if I can, just to sort of podcast, if you will, like I always say, this is a podcast. We can kind of do whatever the hell we want. Let me just kind of talk. This is not me reporting. This is not me putting anything out there. I'm just reacting to stuff. And for the sake of conversation, for the sake of interesting thoughts going through my head, I was on a phone call just before we hopped on. Big news drops today. Former Oklahoma running back, former Dallas Cowboys running back, and former Texas running backs coach Tashard Choice just took the Detroit Lions running backs job in the NFL. Why does that have anything to do with DeMarco Murray? Well, in my opinion, Tashard Choice, first of all, for my Dallas Cowboys, what a miss. I mean, to not get a guy like that for your running back job is just another frustrating episode of being a Dallas area sports fan. But he takes the Detroit job and now getting to coach the Lions, getting to coach his former back in Jahmyr Gibbs when the two were at Georgia Tech, that creates a vacancy at Texas. And Josh, one of the names that had been brought up to me in relation to the Penn State job alongside DeMarco Murray was Stan Drayton. Stan Drayton, Oklahoma fans might remember, Temple head coach. Temple played Oklahoma. He was also the Texas running backs coach. And when he left, Tashard Choice filled the vacancy he created in Austin. Now Tashard Choice out for the Detroit Lions job. If he's been linked potentially to the Penn State job, but now might catch the attention from Texas again, if Texas, let's say in a hypothetical world, hires Stan Drayton away from Penn State's current board, does Penn State try to circle back on DeMarco? I don't know. I don't know. This is just me. It's just me talking through everything that's going on right now. I'm not saying that DeMarco would even entertain it, but maybe this becomes another situation where, I don't know, like Penn State says, hey, why not? Like, let's give him another call and put together a better offer. You just never know with this stuff. Long story short, it pretty much became a story and a non-story as quickly as I've seen in a while. I just think it is kind of interesting because DeMarco Murray is always, it feels like, going to be brought up for high-level vacancies. And I don't think that whether it's this offseason or the offseasons to come, we're done with this type of stuff anytime soon.
Yeah, no, it's a great point on the connecting the dots, with the Tashard Choice stuff. It makes sense because, like you said, I've heard the same. Stan Drayton is probably the guy for that job. But like you said, if he ends up going elsewhere, does that change things for Penn State? It's a great point. Yeah, this popped on Tuesday night that DeMarco and Penn State have been, there have been interest and there have been conversations, or however it was phrased at the time. I was doing high school basketball, calling high school basketball games, and it was kind of like, oh, okay. But then I got off the air and I started talking to some people. It sounded like, no, not a problem. DeMarco's told Oklahoma he's not going to take it, blah, blah, blah. But, I'll be honest, full transparency, the elephant in the room, after Zach Alley, a month and a half ago, you kind of move a little slower on these sort of things because that was kind of the sentiment around that was West Virginia wants him, but Zach's told Oklahoma he's not going anywhere. Like, this is nothing, and then obviously we know now that it ended up very much being something. So, it kind of feels like at this point, you never say never on anything. Sounds like DeMarco's going to be around. I will say this too, and this is again just me kind of speculating, like Collin said at the podcast. We do this every offseason. It doesn't feel like – it feels like DeMarco is a guy that probably will leap to something else sometime in the near future. This offseason, I don't necessarily think so, but it's like, I don't know. It's one of those things. And this offensive staff kind of staying in place is fairly surprising. Obviously brought in Ben Arbuckle to lead the charge. He's going to call plays. So I think everyone thought there would be a shakeup on the staff outside of that. And there hasn't. It's the same group. That may be a smart move or it may not. It's a little bit of a bold move on Brent Venables' part because if the offense stinks again, a lot of people are going to be very frustrated with that. So we'll see. It's kind of one of those interesting things. It's a classic like February offseason story, but we'll see. I guess time will tell. But it sounds like DeMarco's going to stick around. But again, after what we've kind of seen around here, you never really count on anything until it's done deal. Till August comes around and he's at camp. It's like you almost want to just wait. As far as Under Armour Atlanta, like I said, Collin was out there with a number of other 24/7 sports recruiting experts. Lot of content on the website, oakland.247sports.com, coming out of Collin's weekend out there. Like we said, Under Armour Dallas coming up this weekend. We'll talk about that a little bit on the back end of the program. Do we get Collin's thoughts on a couple of targets in particular before he dives into kind of just a bit of a notebook of sorts? Let's start with Jorden Edmonds, 2026 cornerback, elite talent, 4-star guy. You mentioned to me earlier today that you were going to talk about him on the show, so I kind of was looking into him. This is a guy, number 53 player in the class. Like I said, 4-star prospect. The offer list, which is something I always look to first, is like what schools want him. It's a list that you would expect for a player like this in Georgia. Alabama certainly in there, a number of SEC schools. He's planning to commit this month. Collin, what's kind of your read of the situation, and what did you see when you got to see him out there in Atlanta with this kid who, from the looks of it, is someone that is really exciting?
Yeah, I personally was really excited to finally get a little bit more of an opportunity to talk about Jorden, because Jorden and I have known each other for a while. And when you look at him on paper, you're like 6'2.5" corner.
Yeah.
Whoa. And you're like top 60 player in the country. And then you read up, and long story short, we did the drive out there to Carrollton, Georgia for Under Armour Atlanta, and my buddy Hudson Standish and I, we ended up putting together the top performers piece on the scouting side. We named Jorden Edmonds the alpha dog of the camp because we had a fun moment where basically, for a little behind the scenes of the industry, whenever Hudson and I are working together on a top performers piece, we'll split ends of the field for the skill guys, and we'll reconvene afterwards to talk about what we saw in one-on-ones. And the moment we met up in midfield, Hudson looks at me and goes, "Hey, Jorden Edmonds is alpha dog." And I said, "Okay." He had a pick on my end. Hudson said he had a pick on my end, and we went, ooh. So Jorden is not only this extreme talent, like just a sweetheart, like one of the nicest kids in the 2026 class. Mm-hmm. This really like low maintenance. I always talk about it, like high profile corners or some of these premier positions, they have no business being that like calm and relational and cool. And the poor kid was almost quite literally the last person to leave the camp because so many people were trying to interview him, and he was in good graces the whole way through. So why I bring all this up, he's like the perfect player and character fit for what Oklahoma wants to do. And OU is in the top 5 down the stretch. It's Oklahoma, Alabama, Florida, Georgia, and Tennessee. He's going to commit to one of these schools on February 19th, and it kind of came out of the blue. As of right now, I'm going to just tell you, and don't tune out, just follow me here. I don't think Oklahoma's the choice. If I had to give you a guess who the pick is going to be, I think it's Alabama. And my guy, Brett Greenberg, who covers Alabama for us, tossed in his crystal ball in favor of the Crimson Tide. I would do the same, but I'm staying out of it. I think that Alabama is in prime position based on some of the stuff that's been going on behind the scenes. Yeah. Why I mention it, though, he will commit on February 19th. What he told me and a few others when we were talking to him after the camp is he will still take his summer official visits after committing to whichever school he chooses on February 19th. And for all intents and purposes, he's going to take 5 official visits to his top 5 schools, including Oklahoma. Mm-hmm. So he will be back in Norman for an OV weekend, and Alabama is considered the favorite. Funny little like anecdote though related to this is Jorden was at the OU game when they beat Alabama. And so like he's seen OU at its fullest form. And I was joking with his mom as Jorden just kept getting pulled to the side for interviews. And he was telling me that he was excited to get back out to Norman. And I brought that up to his mom, and he goes, she goes, "Yeah, we were at that game and it was crazy." And I joked with her. I was like, "Did y'all storm the field?" She goes, "No, honestly, Jorden and I were trying to make sure that no one fell down in the stands when they were storming." So I don't know. Maybe Jorden Edmonds and Jorden Edmonds' mother saved a few lives that day in Norman. But Oklahoma really likes this player. They have every right to. Again, we named him alpha dog of the camp. He's a top 60 player in the country. And OU, it seems like, will get a final crack at it, whether or not he picks OU on February 19th. And so in general, like Oklahoma's continued to kind of climb into the state of Georgia in the Southeast. Right. This is a perimeter defender that OU has really liked. And I don't think that the Sooners are going to fade away in this race, whether or not that decision falls in their direction.
Yeah, like Collin said, going to commit, announce commitment next week, but sounds like don't step away from this kid just yet. You got the whole summer. Like you said, he's going to try and get to Norman. At some point in the summer, maybe. I don't know. I don't want to put you on the spot, Collin. Champion Barbecue, maybe somewhere in there.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah. So We'll see. I mean, like I said, is just outside the top 50 players, period, 4-star prospect right now. So this is a really good player. And one that if you're Oklahoma, you're not going to give up on. Obviously, you're going to keep doing your due diligence and see if you can't find a way to land him because he's a big-time player. On the offensive side, 3-star wideout Craig Dandridge, another name to bring up from Alpharetta, Georgia. Got a handful of SEC offers. I know in-state Georgia's in there, so Arkansas, Tennessee, among obviously a slew of other offers at the D1 level and Power 5 level. What's kind of the read for him from your perspective? This is another guy, 6'2", 2026 prospect. He's about just outside the top 50, 60 receivers or so in the class in total. He's obviously in a very good high school football state out there in Georgia. What's kind of your read of Craig, what kind of a player he is, and where Oklahoma kind of sits with him?
Yeah, so about a month ago, I was talking to some folks that I know in personnel, and they brought up Craig to me. And they said, hey, like there's this wide receiver in the state of Georgia we kind of like. Check him out. I watched the tape, and I went, oh. And I connected with Craig, and I was like, hey man, like you're killing it. You've got some talent to you. And we had a really good conversation. And then, lo and behold, he starts getting all these offers from programs I have a ton of respect for. Kansas State, Tennessee, Georgia, so on. Oklahoma offers, and talk to some folks. This is a receiver, it sounds like, that Emmett Jones specifically really likes. And I can't blame him one bit. Now you come out of this camp, and I will say, in talking to some of our scouting team guys at 24/7 Sports, early grade on him is a high 88 3-star. There's a world where he rises somewhere down the line as we get more data on him over the next few months. But Craig's a heck of a player. And so currently in the mix, it kind of sounds like it's Oklahoma, Georgia, Georgia Tech, Tennessee, and Vanderbilt. I think that's kind of the core currently for this guy. And OU, it could end up just very early on. This could end up being one where Oklahoma goes to battle with the in-state Bulldogs, because I think OU has been eyeing this player for a while. I think Georgia is now really starting to invest personally in the pursuit of this player. And I think Craig is the type of character to keep an open mind and explore options. I believe he's a native of Memphis, Tennessee, and now in Cambridge High School in Alpharetta. He obviously is not ignoring the fact that there are some regional polls, but he also knows that some high-profile schools are going to ask him to leave state lines. And so I just think this is a player that OU fans should know a little bit more about, because this feels like someone that Oklahoma is going to really go after. And if it ends up being a battle between Oklahoma and Georgia, I mean, fasten your seatbelts, because that's going to get pretty highly contested.
What about some other names from the camp here, 2026 and 2027? Obviously, like we said, a lot of content over on the website, Sooners Illustrated, oklahoma.247sports.com. Become a VIP member, keep up with all this stuff. But for you, Collin, some other names you wanted to kind of roll through that stuck out to you that are of interest as we kind of move along here, both in this class as well as the next one in 2027.
Yeah, I talked with Dorian Barney, who is a corner out of Carrollton, and he is our number 77 overall recruit in the country in the class of 2026. Really talented player. He was supposed to visit Oklahoma prior to the dead period, did not make it. I asked Dorian about that. He ended up going to Ole Miss, if I remember correctly, instead. And now I think since that time, things have cooled off a little bit. So I think Dorian Barney, he's been a player that OU has been after over the last few months, even going back to this past season. But I think some things are distancing there. Class of 2027 wise, there were a lot of guys out there. And I will say it was a little bit of a bummer that some 2026 defensive linemen who I went out there to go see that are high priority targets for Oklahoma did not make the camp. I'm talking about Deuce Geralds, Kamarian Johnson. Both of those interior defensive linemen are expected to be atop the target board for OU in 2026. But in 2027, I'm going to start with KJ Green, top 70 recruit for us at 24/7 Sports and a top 10 edge. I found this interesting. In the class of 2027 for us at 24/7 Sports, currently the top 10 edges nationally across America, 4 of them are from the state of Georgia alone, which to me is mind-boggling. So what that means to me is that Georgia is obviously going to be able to get a couple of pretty solid in-state edge rushers,
right?
But they may not be able to get all of them. And so KJ Green is one that I'm keeping an eye on. Oklahoma has been prioritizing this guy for a while. He is very close with Miguel Chavis, and he's going to be back in Oklahoma out of the dead period, he told me, on March 8th. That Future Freaks trip is booked. I think OU is very much in the mix for KJ Green, and he was a top performer for us in the piece that we did out of the camp. He had a really solid day. Andrew Beard, 2027 two-way player, plays both running back and safety. Oklahoma hosted him at a summer camp last year. DeMarco Murray since has been someone who Andrew Beard has been very high on. And I found it a little bit ironic. He told me when we chopped it up after the camp that the 3 schools standing out to him the most: Georgia, down the street from him, Oklahoma, because of DeMarco Murray, and Penn State. And I was like, okay. Luckily for Oklahoma, DeMarco Murray and Penn State doesn't appear to be a thing, because I feel like that might shape Andrew Beard's recruitment a little bit. But OU doing well with a player who I believe is number 90 for us in the class of 2027 early on. And then the last guy that I want to bring up is a 2027 defensive lineman out of the state of Alabama. His name is Elijah Brown. He has yet to receive his player grade, but again, it's the class of 2027. That's a ways from now. An early top 100 was put out, and I think the 2027 class will eventually take the spotlight. But 2026 is officially kind of getting the page turned to it. In 27, Elijah Brown picked up the Oklahoma offer last May. He might be visiting out of the dead period in the spring. He told me the 2 schools that he would prefer to see in the spring are Mississippi State and Oklahoma, because right now it's LSU, Auburn, Georgia, Tennessee, the heavy hitters for an interior defensive lineman in the Southeast. And Todd Bates, why I bring him up in relation to Elijah Brown, Todd Bates' hometown in the state of Alabama, roughly a 2.5-hour drive from where Elijah Brown currently resides. And so this feels like someone that Bates might be able to pursue effectively. And so I'm interested to see how these efforts in the state of Georgia, in the Southeast, how it goes for Oklahoma. You can tell that the state of Georgia and surrounding areas are a priority for OU. And that's why I'm making these trips out there, man, because Oklahoma is expanding its recruiting efforts into the Peach State and beyond. And so far, I think it is paying off.
I want to ask you about that, kind of on that note. Just obviously, you were out there, over the weekend. What's kind of your sense? And you're not out there every day. Obviously, you're in the DFW area, but from talking to these guys, people around there, coaches, whatever, I guess this was kind of your sense of how Oklahoma's looked at in that region right now. Obviously, in the SEC going to year 2 now. Obviously, first year didn't go well, but it's still Oklahoma, still a blue blood. I guess just in your mind, I'm sure fans are curious, like these guys in the SEC footprint. I mean, I think it's more realistic for a lot of people to see in the state of Texas or, obviously in-state guys goes without saying, but kind of the natural recruiting areas why Oklahoma would still be an easy sell. But is Oklahoma having a hard time or not? I mean, what's kind of your sense of going into the SEC, into Georgia, pulling guys away from the Georgias, the Tennessees, all the Alabamas, the schools that have that kind of geographic advantage? What's kind of your sense of how Oklahoma's doing there going into year 2 now, obviously in the SEC?
Yeah, it's something that I've really tried to sort of hone in on, because I do think it's something that not a lot of people are talking about, but it's very relevant as Oklahoma transitions into the Southeast. Like OU had to build a greater footprint in SEC territory, but that's far easier said than done, especially when you're talking about the state of Florida, for example, which is so highly contested, and the list goes on and on. But it does feel like a lot of programs, not just Oklahoma, but Texas, the amount of investment that program is making in the state of Georgia. You saw them pull off a stunner this past cycle with the win over Georgia for Justice Terry, the 5-star defensive tackle. Oklahoma's pulling guys from the areas as well, and you've seen them send out more offers in the states of Georgia, the state of Alabama, the state of Mississippi, which I think is another one that was heavily represented at the camp. The thing that I've now go on to kind of say, and again, 2 years in a row, being able to go out to the state of Georgia and talk with all of these guys in sort of the mid-southeast area about Oklahoma, the overarching theme, and fans, as I always say, they may not want to hear this, but it's just kind of the truth. It's not like success or program view. It's the fact that a lot of these kids don't even know what Oklahoma football is. They don't know. The program familiarity just isn't there. And you know what? That's okay. It's okay. They don't understand what OU's football history is because they have no reason to grow up and watch a program like OU for years on end. Some of them have been able to keep up with it. And I will say, you asked about the early SEC struggles. A lot of those guys were just like, yeah, I'm not really worried about that because it's a hard transition to make year one in the SEC. So I don't think that there's a lot of guys dinging Oklahoma for what was seen in 2024. I think they kind of get it. But it's also one of those things where these guys have seen programs like the Georgias, the Alabamas, now the Ole Misses, who they've grown up watching win a lot of games. And their early exposure to Oklahoma, let's say over the last 2-3 years, it's kind of been a steady build of familiarity being brought to the table. And so they're still actively learning how they should view OU as a conference power. It's very interesting to me. I'm continuing to track it because I think that the state of Georgia, the state of Mississippi, the state of Alabama, those are going to be territories that OU really tries to pursue, because if you're going to go into the state of Florida specifically, where everyone goes, you got to understand you're going to take your lumps. These kind of feel like emerging states from a talent perspective. And OU's going after these guys. I think it's just a matter of simply stating the obvious. These guys still don't know the program that's pursuing them. They're still trying to figure out what Oklahoma football is. And I just feel like as long as OU gets back onto the right track over the next few seasons, they have a chance to really form a positive image. And I think that this current staff has at least done a very good job in the meantime of strengthening relationships and showing these guys what OU is off the field. It's continuing to build that reputation on the field as well.
No doubt. Going to be interesting to continue to see how that develops into this cycle, obviously, and we'll keep an eye on it. Got the great guy for the job here with CK, who's all over it year-round. As far as coming back here more close to the homestead, for you, obviously right down the road, Under Armour Dallas is this weekend. Obviously, Collin will be out there, all kind of same thing. I'm sure a number of other 24/7 sports recruiting experts will be as well. For you, Collin, where does the attention go this week in Dallas? Obviously, this is all a lot of guys you're going to be familiar with from in-state, and I'm sure some of the neighboring states perhaps. But for you, I guess the storylines, the players to watch in particular, what are some objectives that you have going into this weekend that you're going to be watching out for that we'll be talking about on the show next week coming out of it?
Yeah, I'm really excited because I'm going to be subbing in as the national reporter for Under Armour Dallas this weekend. And why I bring that up, I'm pretty much going to be tasked with covering every single heavy hitter there is at this event. And so we're going to have a lot to talk about coming out of this weekend relative to some of the truly elite talents, not just in the state of Texas, but why I bring this up and why I'm so excited to cover it from a national perspective. There are going to be guys from the state of Oklahoma. Several state of Oklahoma recruits are set to compete this weekend, which I'm excited to see how they fare. I talk about how Elijah Thomas showed out at this event last year for the state of Oklahoma. The state of Arkansas will be represented as well heavily. State of Arkansas is one that I have a number of ties to in the recruiting scene, and so I'm excited to see those guys as well. I'm going to have a ton of stuff coming out of the weekend, not just on Oklahoma targets, but in general, kind of getting a true lay of the land with players atop the top 247 in 2026 and even going into 2027. Some of the guys that I do want to highlight going into the weekend, though, as I've been gathering some recruiting intel ahead of time. Again, I'm trying to cover this weekend's event for all of our team sites. So far, I've been able to gather a decent amount of stuff on maybe some rising talents or some well-established guys that I have a good amount of familiarity to. I want to start with the guy that I feel like I really kind of got out in front of this being a storyline. A few weeks ago, I reported that Rylan Morris in Oklahoma was becoming a thing again. And I felt like this was something we really needed to put on our radar. The official visit is now booked. You fast forward a few weeks later, Oklahoma's going to get him on campus on June 6th. He's going to visit Stanford. I mentioned Stanford as well for an OV. And then he's still committed to Baylor. He's going to conclude his slate with a trip to Waco to see the Bears on June 13th. I was told that after all of that goes down, he'll pretty much sit down and come to some sort of final decision. I think it's very important that Oklahoma is getting him the second to last weekend before he goes and sees Baylor, the program he is committed to. You kind of get that final pitch on the flip after Stanford. And so I think Rylan Morris, now that all being scheduled, I talked to a source who really felt like this was going to become another heated recruitment in that few short weeks span in the summer. And so Rylan Morris, going into this weekend, I'm sure we'll be talking about him a lot more. I want to bring him up. The OV to Oklahoma is booked. Mm-hmm. Also have been checking in with the player and a few others around him. Aljor Miles, the receiver in Kaufman, Texas, saw him this past season, and he was dominant. He has an official visit to Oklahoma booked on June 20th. He is going to visit a number of other schools in the area. I also think USC is going to have a say here. Kansas is going to have a say here. But OU, I still feel, is doing the best job pursuing this guy. I think his relationship with Emmett Jones is pretty much the strongest in his recruitment. And so I'm keeping an eye on him. Checked in with DJ Ackerson out of Oklahoma City's, is it Putnam City?
I think Putnam City. Is it Putnam City PCO? Putnam City Original, I think.
I think it's PCO.
3 Putnam City schools.
Yes. And so we swapped some stuff before the camp this weekend, and he told me the 3 programs standing out the most right now are Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, and Kansas State. He has not yet booked anything as far as official visits, but he is set to visit Kansas State and Oklahoma State in the spring after visiting OU prior to the dead period. So kind of an early trio forming there. This feels like a player that Oklahoma's really going to go after out of the dead period. So I personally am expecting OU to work out some sort of OV with him. We'll see on that one, but was able to check in with DJ Ackerson, the linebacker in state. And then the last guy I kind of wanted to bring up out of the early intel piece, we talk about him. I think we've talked about him a couple times with Braden Presley, the corner defensive back out of Bixby. So I asked him what's going on with his recruitment. I'm excited to see him compete, by the way, this weekend. I'm very curious to see how he'll do, not only relative to competition, but testing. I feel like a bigger frame corner like him, I want to see how he fares. But he said he hasn't necessarily booked anything spring or summer-wise, but that the group of schools standing out the most is Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Kansas State, Texas Tech, and Arkansas, which is a very intriguing early 5. It wouldn't shock me if that's kind of the group of 5 that gets the official visit scheduled together over the summer for him. He did say that over the next week and a half, he's going to be booking his official visits. So we're going to know where he's going OV-wise over the next 7 to 10 days. And then he will book spring visits after he has his official visits booked. So I'm very interested to see how this one goes. I think he's flexible with his timeline. He was like, either I make a decision after the summer OVs that I get together, or I make it middle of the season at Bixby. So another little nugget that I've picked up is that an in-state target at defensive back could have some news for OU over the next week or two. And Oklahoma, again, we know that the Presley brothers, the reputation that they have, this is the next one up. And I really like Braden as a player. And so some early intel I've been gathering, I'm going to have a lot more specifically on guys very highly ranked. And I'm going to have even more notes on the site coming out of Under Armour Dallas. Again, I pretty much have to cover every single recruit that shows up this weekend. So I'm going to consolidate all of that and then put it into a Oklahoma-specific recruiting notebook. But our own Blake and Kovac will be there with me as well.
All right.
To cover the event. And so hopefully we can have him debut on the show maybe next week and talk about everything that we get. But further coverage coming to Sooners Illustrated. And again, really excited to see not only state of Texas guys, but state of Oklahoma guys, Arkansas guys, and so on competing at Under Armour Dallas this weekend.
No doubt. Look forward to that this weekend, both from Collin, like he said, as well as Blake. We'll have lots of content, I'm sure, on the site coming out of that. Obviously over the weekend, but especially in the early part of next week before the show. And then next Thursday, we'll get into all of it, pull it apart. So look forward to that. A lot of content coming from Dallas. Did have one bonus football thing, Collin. This just was reported like 15-ish minutes ago or so from ESPN's Pete Thamel. Just want to get your quick thoughts. It's not anything massively groundbreaking, but JP Losman looks like he's headed to Washington. Obviously, JP has been on the staff with Oklahoma the last few years, I think since Brent Venables came aboard, right? Since he came in, I'm pretty sure. Last several seasons, at the least, last few. So he's going to Washington. He's going to be the school's assistant quarterback coach. He has a relationship with Jed Fish. They go back. So not a shocking thing. Obviously, JP is not someone who has been on the traditional staff. He's not wearing a headset on the weekends, but he has been around. He has been, especially in this cycle, was out on the road a lot with Brent Venables doing some recruiting, some in-home visits and things like that. Real quick for you, Collin, just I guess your initial reaction here. Again, this is not, I don't want to overstate it, but also like JP did have a role. He did help it, and he has been around Brent for a while. So it is noteworthy at the very least. What's kind of your quick thoughts here as this just was reported, like I said, 15, 20 minutes ago, but initial reaction for you here?
Yeah, first thing that comes to mind for me as far as JP Losman is it is a loss. I think JP, I've talked about it a couple of times here on the show and on the site, but he's kind of been OU's secret weapon behind the scenes from a recruiting standpoint. He spends a lot of time pursuing these players. I think he's a very good relationship builder. I think a lot of parents really trusted JP Losman. I think a lot of recruits really got to know him as an individual. And you saw OU kind of showcase that as Brent Venables opted to take him on trips around the country to go see these players. And the way it was kind of presented to me was like, look, JP is the guy that sometimes is on the phone with all these dudes. They may as well get to know him in person. And so it is a tough loss. However, I'm not shocked by it, to be honest with you. I think JP, it was probably always the preference of a former NFL player at the quarterback position to get some sort of on-field role. And he was an assistant director of player personnel type. I think he was assistant director of player personnel for the defense specifically. Definitely stuff that not necessarily a former NFL quarterback probably wants to do long-term. And I think this is a very realistic opportunity for him to further his career in the coaching game. It creates more turnover in OU's front office, man. There's a lot of vacancies that have to be filled over the next few weeks. And it's just one more, another position to fill in that front office. And I think it increases, honestly, the pressure on the general manager hire specifically, because you do have to think that the GM specifically coming in will have a lot of say on who is in the front office to fill an assistant director of player personnel type role. But Oklahoma still has Drew Hill, who has been around the program for years. And Drew is one of the best in the game. I can tell you, going out to the personnel summit in Nashville this past summer, Drew Hill is widely thought of as one of the best. OU still has Jolie Ale, who was an excellent hire by Brent Venables and has been killing it from an organizational standpoint. And OU has been leaning on Jake Rosenberg behind the scenes. And it seems like Jake has gone from a consultant to really being a proactive member of this currently structured front office. And so it is a tough loss, but I think Oklahoma has had a lot of people in the building currently who have been very proactive. And until they make a hire to replace JP Losman, they have the right people currently in the building to continue the operation.
Yeah, like you said, just another thing to do, another position to fill, another thing on the to-do list for Brent Venables over the course of this offseason, which was having so much change, so much having to happen, obviously, in a relatively short amount of time. Like you said, I mean, when JP was out on the road and talking to recruits and everything, there was kind of the thought, I mean, I got asked a couple times, like, is he getting elevated? Is he getting a bigger role with these changes? You know, is he a name that's getting a little more responsibility? And it kind of felt like maybe, possibly, he's been around Brent for a while. Even I think he was at Clemson before. So like they've known each other for a while, but like you said, it always kind of makes sense that he would jump to something a little more to his natural skill set as a former NFL quarterback. And that appears to be happening here. Really, my main question, who's going to be the pro day quarterback now? Because JP Losman was the pro day quarterback the last few years because they haven't had a quarterback go into the draft. And so he's been the one slinging around. We always kind of a joke about it. Is like that is like his biggest day of the year. The fact that he gets to get out there, get full loose, and let it rip in front of some NFL scouts again. But I have to find someone else to. Maybe Jimmy Greenbeans will do it now. I don't know.
I mean, I really enjoyed watching him at the summer camp this past summer. Get the walkie-talkie call.
He threw it,
and he left the outdoor portion of the camp, strutted in there, grabbed the ball, flicked it, and started tossing the rock for the running back linebackers. And you could tell like he's just all about it. He gets into that mental space whenever he gets the ball. But I think this is the closest he's going to get to being a quarterback again, is actually being back in a quarterback room and coaching guys up. So excited for him to get an opportunity, like you mentioned, that's a little bit more in his wheelhouse.
No doubt about it. I think that's it. Obviously, we'll be back next week. Like I said just a minute ago, Collin's going to be at Under Armour Dallas weekend with Blake and Koviak. Well, might be able to get Blake on the show next week, like Collin said, 3 of us, and maybe kind of recap the weekend there. So keep an eye out for that. I'll be back on Monday with James, Tom, myself, recapping the weekends that were for OU basketball, a must-have game against LSU on Saturday. Tom and I will be there for that. And it is baseball opening weekend this week as well. So maybe recap a little bit there, as well as softball's down in Baylor, I believe, in Waco, playing a tournament down there. So I have a lot to talk about and recap anything else with football, continue our position stash report series as well. Collin, we'll see you next week. So you're probably going to have more fun, I'm guessing, at Under Armour Dallas than I will at the Lloyd Noble Center. But, digress. Must-have game this weekend for that squad. We didn't get into it. We'll talk about it with Tom on Monday. But the game in Columbia did not go well on Wednesday night. If you didn't see it, you're fortunate. So we press on. But have a good weekend in Dallas, and we'll talk to you next week, man.
I will, and looking forward to talking about it all next week, and I cannot wait to see what comes from the weekend that is for OU basketball, because last night was a fiasco, to say the least. So I will see you next week.
After this last football season and the way this basketball season is trending, I'm very excited that baseball opening day is tomorrow. I'll leave it at that.
What a sports calendar year for the Oklahoma Sooners, man. I'm glad that OU softball is back. You know what I mean? OU baseball looks like they have a really good team too. It feels like we've needed the dime in sports more than ever.
Save us. Matty Gasso and Skip Johnson, save us. All right, that's it for now. Back on Monday with Tom and James. For Collin Kennedy, I'm Josh Callaway signing off for now. We'll see you next time right back here on the Sooners Illustrated podcast.